All right, everyone, it's a total coincidence and it's totally surprising to everybody, but Wisconsin now leans blue by like a couple thousand votes, with something like 90+% counted. Isn't it crazy how the late votes coming in from the outer Madison area just happened to be almost exactly the right total to tilt it just a little bit in favor of Joe Biden? Isn't that completely crazy? It's very, very odd that that's happening, and really, let's be reasonable. I think we all foresaw that this sort of thing is going to happen. There is ballot fraud. The general election is being tampered with in the way that in 2016 it was not, which is what I've said for years, is 2016 was actually a pretty fair election. A lot of Trump fans are like, oh, Hillary's going to rig it. The general election has never really been rigged before because you have two controlled opposition candidates. You just rig the primaries. It's hardly illegal. The parties can basically do whatever the fuck they want to screw one candidate over another. It's easy. You just have a billionaire party apparatus that funds and disproportionately treats the candidate that they want well, the person that they've bought off, and they call it a day. In the general election, they sit back, let them duke it out. They do both want to be president. They have big egos. You know, you have to be kind of a psycho to want the presidency, whether you're Trump or Biden, by the way, that still applies. But the general's not, you don't need to rig it. What we're seeing now, though, is a very dangerous scenario, and I say that because of this. Let's say that Trump wins or Biden wins. A significant proportion of the country is not going to accept the election result, regardless of whether there's any rigging or not. Look, I will grant this. If Trump manages to lose, because in the 11th hour a bunch of late ballots come in still smelling of printer ink, still warm from the printer, so to speak, fraud will be involved in that. However, even if it weren't, even if it were fair and square, just a bunch of mail-in ballots, they disproportionately favored Biden at levels, incommensurate with other early mail-in totals from other states, but the impossible happens, and these states deviate by 5 to 10 points in the mail-in totals. It's inexplicable how that would happen, by the way, at that point. Let's say that Biden manages to win fairly. Do you think the average Trump fan is going to accept the result? I don't think that they will. Let's say that Trump manages to pull it off anyway. So at this point, maybe he loses Wisconsin, but let's say he manages to retain the other 4 states that are still outstanding and he's still ahead. He wins at that point with, 276 or something like that, some minuscule number. A lot of Biden fans will assume it's evidence of fascism that Trump has stolen the election. They're already setting up for that at this time. I would say this. Salt aside, funny part of the whole situation aside, because you can laugh at anyone that you really want to. It's a dangerous thing for our republic, because what happens at that point, if it is close, I don't believe that either Biden or Trump will concede the election. I do not believe that the loser in this election will concede unless pressed to in a court case. That means the Supreme Court gets involved. There are unfortunately only 2 possibilities here, neither of which are good. You either have a unanimous decision, which would almost certainly be in favor of Biden, in which case Trump's fans are alienated even further and say, oh my God, even the judiciary is in on it. Even his own justices are in on it, and they'll go crazy. Or it'll be a split 5-4 decision, because we know how the 3 liberals would vote. They'll vote based on their ideology, not based on constitutional precedent or reality. Roberts will join them. You'll have a 5-4 decision in favor of Trump giving him the election, certifying that result. In which case people say, oh my God, the far right has stolen the White House, and 3 of those justices were Trump appointees. Oh my God, they only did it because Trump appointed them. And you got these other 2 really old dudes that are, really far right, and that's not technically incorrect in many ways. It's illegitimate, and then Biden's fans will riot and burn shit down. And if Trump loses, you'll have militias organizing. Unfortunately, we face somewhat untested waters. The last time that we've had, I think, elections this dirty was the Gilded Era. Some people say, whoa, this is a prelude to Civil War. No, that's not what I'm saying. But the Gilded Era was very dicey. We've already seen yellow journalism. We've already seen muckraking. Basically, it's like, Jesus, did I time travel back to 1895, only with electricity being widespread and, this thing called the internet instead of telegraphs? It's almost how it feels. And by the way, I'm registering that pulse all online because I'm sitting here in Amsterdam. So obviously people here aren't too concerned about the U.S. election by and large. it's a constitutional crisis. The problem is people's fear and in some cases anger on both sides has been jacked up now for years by the legacy media. They've created a powder keg. If it blows up, they're going to be the ones that have to own it. They won't. They'll say it's the result of the evil far right. It's the evil of communism or some minority group. It'll be the result of the corporate media complex and the deep state, the establishment. These people have been priming the pump for years now, waiting for things to blow, and it'll be their fault. I'll even go back to Decision Desk right now. Because Wisconsin's basically a 50-50 sum game. There's less than half a point that's separating potentially Biden and Trump. I'm pretty sure there's going to be an automatic recount there. And even if I give Trump the states that I think reliably they'll go for him unless there's significant fraud involved. It looks like Michigan, they've got their late ballots and Trump's still clinging to a small lead. Trump could win the election but end up losing the war essentially. Let's say he loses control of Wisconsin. Let's say that happens. But he grabs the other 4 states up. And I think that that's likely. He wins by less than 10 electoral votes. Where's the mandate involved? Regardless of who is governing the nation, at the end of the day, they're going to be leading by such a small total that it's almost meaningless. Half the population won't even acknowledge their presidency. There have been times before in our history when things have been done illegitimately, but they're binding anyway. And I would say this especially to Trump fans. Even if you think that rigging is going on, let's say that we think that the election's been stolen. I think that is something ongoing at this time. I do happen to believe that it is a rigged election. Whether they pull it off or not is a different story. It really depends on their maneuverability, but let's say that happens. Even if you do not acknowledge the legitimacy of Beijing Biden, you still have no choice but to operate under the legal system of the United States unless you're, suicidal or something like that. We've had cases like that before. The FISA court system that exists is unconstitutional, but it's still the law of the land. The NFA violates the Second Amendment, but it's still recognized as case law. It's still enforced. You could argue that property taxes, in some roundabout ways, are unlawful, but they're still enforced. Try not paying them and see what happens. See, here's the problem. Things don't always go as they are meant to go under the true auspices of the Constitution. Segregation was a thing for years, blatantly violated equal protection under the law. Blatantly. But it was still in force. You still got arrested if you protested it. You still got hosed down. You still got dogs sicked on you. It didn't matter that it was technically illegal. It was still the law. Yes, the law can be illegal but still be enforced. It can take SCOTUS or a federal court decades to decide these things. My biggest fear at this point is that regardless of who wins, there's basically at least 2 and possibly 4 years of complete dysfunction within our government simply because so much of the population will refuse to obey any dictates that they make. They'll refuse to understand that the government is legitimate, and it may not be. The election could feasibly be stolen. When you've got virtually all of Silicon Valley, virtually all the multinational billionaires that run the corporate media, virtually all of the sort of war contractor side of politics, 99.9% of these people back Joe Biden. If Joe Biden at the 11th hour manages to pull it out of his ass because a couple of states at the 11th hour mysteriously flip, yes, I will credit that to being possibly fraud-related. I don't care if this is considered to be, by the way, a conspiratorial point of view. Our government's done crazier shit before, dude. Those who don't learn history are doomed to repeat it. At this particular time, though, looking especially at Michigan with the late results there, I think I still favor Trump. Then that's just almost as much of a problem, because do you think Biden's going to concede? If there's any outstanding votes at all, it could take him days to tabulate these things. Even if the states get called, he might not concede. I think the bigger risk is from Biden. I don't think that I mean, at the end of the day, if Trump says, well, I refuse to concede, people say, okay, he's being a bully again. Fucking just go off. He's not going to mobilize the military. He's not going to throw people in cages. There's not going to be magical fascism and swastikas flying from the White House. That's hyperbole. It's never going to actually happen. That fear was peddled to you to try to get you not to vote for Donald Trump. Biden represents a deep state apparatus that is very deeply entrenched. These are the people who build the bombs that the president has a little red button to field. They're the people that build the bombs, if not deploy them actively. I think that's a great threat to our republic. We've been warned, by the way, by past presidents about the military-industrial complex. Now, and we've got almost a dozen states still outstanding. 7 or 8 states here still outstanding, despite the fact that we've got reasonable results. In some cases, you get 99% tabulated. They haven't called the fucking state. What other possible purpose could there be behind it other than there are shenanigans going on? Like in Wisconsin. Oh yeah, that truck full of votes, yeah, oh my god. Biden suddenly 2,000 votes ahead. Who'da thunk it? It's a big mystery about how that happened. I bet anything if you dipped your nose into one of those containers, you'd still smell the hot ink on them. I don't think that it's fair at all. Nor did I think anyone expect it to be fair, including Biden fans. If Trump wins in a squeaker, they're not going to accept the election results. That's a whole fucking problem. People have been so whipped up into a paranoid frenzy for the last 4 years about fascism, communism, everything else under the sun that they're not thinking clearly. They're constantly hopped up on hormones, essentially. Their brains, they're constantly being pumped full of adrenaline, waiting for the sky to fall. Now, people need to calm down at least a little. I want you to be 10% less afraid and 15% less angry today than yesterday. And then hopefully, we'll make it through the next 24 hours without things exploding into riots. That's about all. Peace out.